You're listening to the Mangino Talks podcast. I'm your host, Mangino. Thank you very much for joining us. Make sure you follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube channel, TikTok. It's really easy. Just type in @Mangino Talks and you'll find me. This episode is a really special one to me because I've had Dr. Knowledge on my show countless times over my career on KDKA. But what I've never done is go back and explore and find out Dr. Knowledge and how he came to become Dr. Knowledge and misinformation. You may recall misinformation with him when he was hosting evening overnights on Fridays and Saturdays for a decade or more. And we're going to bring them both onto the show right now. Dr. Knowledge, misinformation, welcome to Mangino Talks.
Oh, great being with you.
Glad to be here.
Thank you very much for both being here with me. So real quick, where did the concept come up of Dr. Knowledge and misinformation? We'll start there and then we'll go all the way back to the beginning.
Well, I had the Dr. Knowledge show on KDKA, and we had dinner one evening with the program director, and he had never met my wife Audrey before. And as usual, she was very funny and made some wonderful comments as we had dinner. And the next morning, I got a telephone call from him, and he said, "Hey, why don't you put her on the program with you? She was great." So I said, "Boy, that's wonderful." And then I had a friend, and I told him what happened, and he came up with the name Misinformation, which added a little more humor and nicety to it. So this was like the second or third year into. I started the Dr. Knowledge show on KDKA overnight in the early 2000s. And this was probably about 2005, 2006. Audrey joined me on air as Misinformation. And we had so many jokes about that over the years with the misinformation.
Oh, nice. What did you think, Audrey, when they first suggested that maybe you should go on the air too?
I got all excited. I was basically egotistical enough to say, what the heck, I can go. But one thing you haven't mentioned, Chuck, was how you got the name Dr. Knowledge.
Oh, we're going to get to that. Definitely going to get to that. How about if we go back, though? What would you say would be the beginning of your fascination with facts, interesting trivia? Where does it go back to?
Man, you know, it all happened on one day. I had gotten a job as an intern, what we now call interns. They didn't call it that in the old days, at a radio station in Pittsburgh. I was still in high school. I was about 14 years old. And they had me working on July 4th, since I was the youngest one there. They made me work on the July 4th holiday. So my job as an intern was to work in the newsroom. And this was long before computers. The news came over teletypes, which were machines that printed the news. And there was one machine for breaking news, one for feature stories, one for business, one for sports. And my job was to tear off the sheets of paper of the stories as they came in over these teletypes. And they had nails up on the wall, and you put the news stories here, the sports stories here, feature stories here, and so on. So I'm sitting there. There was a quiet July 4th morning, and the teletypes are working. The news is coming in. And all of a sudden, I see a story on the feature teletype about just an amazing fact. It said that 3 of the first 5 U.S. presidents all died on July 4th. And I thought, boy, I never heard that. We never were taught that in school. I don't remember hearing that. So I quickly looked it up, and it is true. 3 of the first 5 U.S. presidents did die on July 4th. First of all, the fact that 3 of the first 5 presidents would all die on the same date, all of unrelated causes, is amazing.
Right.
And of all the dates in the year, it was July 4th. I mean, what a story. So I ripped this thing off as it came over the teletype and read it again. They had an encyclopedia. We didn't have computers, as I said. So, but they did have a set of encyclopedias there in the newsroom. So I, looked up each president for the date that he died, and it absolutely was true. John Adams, the second president, and Thomas Jefferson, the third president, both died not only on July 4th, but on the same July 4th. What are the odds on that?
Which must have been really shocking to you as you were doing this research.
Why didn't we learn this in school? I said to myself, it's an amazing fact. And then the fifth president, James Monroe, died on July 4th, 1831. Adams and Jefferson died on July 4th, 1826. And the other oddity about that is that was the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which Thomas Jefferson had written, with John Adams being the chairman of the committee to write the Declaration of Independence. That happened on July 4th, 1776. These two guys both died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years to the day.
Wow.
What are the odds on that? And then James Monroe, the fifth president, died on July 4th, 1831. And we almost had four of the first five presidents dying on July 4th because the fourth president, James Madison, died on June 28th. He missed July 4th by 1 week. So anyhow, I said, and by the way, there's one more little story about as John Adams was dying on July 4th, 1826, he said, supposedly he said, this is some historians dispute this, but in any case, the story is that he said, he knew he was dying, but he said, Jefferson lives. He didn't know that Jefferson had died earlier that same day. And of course, in those times, there were no telephones, there was no radio, no TV, right, no wireless, no telegraphs. So he had no way of knowing that Jefferson had also died on that same day. But anyhow, what are the odds on that? So I had this sheet of paper from the teletype, and I made a copy of it, and that just started my thirst for looking for stories like that, stories that, are really surprising, fascinating, and that began, and I really spent the rest of my life looking for things like that. And when you're looking for them, you can find them. I read a lot of obituaries and things like that over the years, and so that started more than 50 years ago. So I've been collecting these kind of surprising stories, or what we now call fascinating stories, and that's really been my life's work.
How old were you when that started?
That day, I would guess 14. I might have been 13, 14, 15. I don't remember the exact age that I was that day. And that was more than...
Well, that is really young to be working at a radio station. How did you even get the in the first place to be able to be there? Because when people are thinking about interns, they're thinking about college interns, people who are 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, not as young as you just described, 14 years old or so.
Well, I had a very lucky person going for me, and that was Bob Prince, who many of your listeners will remember is a very famous pirate broadcaster for many years. Bob had just come to Pittsburgh. He had graduated from Harvard and came here as a sports announcer, not as a pirate announcer yet. And he had a sports show on the station in Pittsburgh. And he's the one that got me the job as an intern. And I met him, and Gino's an interesting story. He came here and started his sports show, and I was a big sports fan and a big radio fan. I used to love to listen to the radio. This is when I'm 12, 13, 14. And he came here, and I really was impressed by him. He was something special, and your listeners who remember him will, I think, agree. He was unique. He was just one of the great announcers in radio, TV history. So anyhow, I found out one summer afternoon at my age of 14, I think it was, that he lived just down the street from where we lived. So in my young, having guts to walk down and knock on his door, the door opens and this beautiful woman was there. She was wearing, this was in the middle of the summer, she's wearing shorts and just gorgeous. It turned out to be his wife, Betty Prince. And I said, I'm a big fan of Bob's. I just love to meet him if I could. And she said, oh, yes, sure, come on in. She invited me in. He was in another room, and she said, Bob, here's somebody who would like to meet you. Bob came. Couldn't have been nicer. Here's a little kid coming in. She made popcorn, and we sat there and talked for maybe a half hour, 45 minutes, and that was the beginning. I had a lifelong friendship after that with Bob. And when I married Audrey, and we used to go out to dinner with them many times. We had, over the years, many social events together. And that was the beginning of it, and he just couldn't have been nicer to me. I mean, here's a kid, that just walked in, and as I say, he just couldn't have been nicer. And that he got me the job. He was on the station here in Pittsburgh, WJAS, and got me a job there as the intern, and
nice.
That started my whole lifetime, really.
All right, well, let's talk about the relationship between you and Audrey, Dr. Knowledge, Misinformation. Who wants to go first on this? My understanding is, Doc, that when you first met Audrey, that it really wasn't much of an issue for you. I mean, it was almost as though,
Our two mothers were friends. We lived in Mount Lebanon.
Okay.
And I was 8 years old, and her mother used to wheel her over, and she was, maybe 6 months old. And her mother used to wheel her over in a buggy. And, of course, being an 8-year-old little boy, I had absolutely no interest in baby girls at that time. So I didn't pay attention to her, but I remember her coming over to our house, and then my mother, occasionally we would go to their house. So I saw her as, but I absolutely paid no attention to her at that age.
But 20 years later, I was having a party for my sister who had just gotten engaged, and a friend called and said, could she bring a boy to town, back to the party, who just moved back to town? So I said, fine, and she said, his name is Charles Richbloom, and I hung up the phone, and I said to my mother, Gerda just called, and she wants to bring Chuck Richbloom to the party. My mother said, Chuck Richbloom? Oh, I always said if I ever had a boy, that's the boy I wanted. So the party comes, and I meet him that night, and of course I'm already impressed because my mother likes him, and that's the first time we met.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Did you guys start dating soon after that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I called her a few days later, and we had a long talk at the party, I remember.
Yeah, I remember he was so intelligent. I just kept looking at him and looking at him.
Yeah.
So when did you guys realize that you were starting to get serious?
I think we got serious pretty quick. We didn't get married quickly because she wanted to finish college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess we dated a couple of years.
And then when you got married, it wasn't as though it was a big production, was it?
No. Well, actually, I was underage, so we had to go to the city to get a license.
And underage at that time was how old?
20.
21.
I was only 20.
She was 20. You had to
So-
be 21 to get a marriage license then without the bride's parents' consent.
So my mother had to go with me when we got our license, and Chuck's there, of course, and the guy's reading it, and my mother's going, oh, poor Chuck. Oh, poor Chuck. And the guy stops and he says, excuse me, ma'am, we're supposed to have her mother, not his. She said, I am her mother, and I still say, poor Chuck.
They had a very interesting relationship, Audrey's mother and Audrey. And her mother was wonderful, really. And much of this was funny. She was doing this as a joke more than anything else. But she was a little concerned if Audrey was ready for marriage. She was only 20 and was a young 20, really.
And I had just finished I finished college in 3 years, so I had just graduated Carnegie Mellon, which was Carnegie Tech at that point.
She went 2 summers so she could finish quicker
and get married.
So obviously, academically brilliant, but Mom was concerned that maybe not enough life experience yet to make a lifelong commitment to marriage?
Exactly. I wasn't good for anything in my mother's eyes.
Well, deep down, she was. Audrey was sort of a rebellious kid.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So give me an idea, and the listeners an idea of your rebellious attitude.
I can only tell you that I went to Winchester Thurston for schooling, and the headmaster there, mistress, said, "There's never been anyone here like you." And I was always doing little things.
Well, tell her about the chalk story.
Well, we had a study hall where the 8th through the 12th grade all sat before classes. And to get the attention, the teacher always rang this little bell. And I thought, what would happen if she didn't have a bell? Would everybody be quiet anyhow? So, of course, I hid the bell. And she couldn't get people under control, and she's saying, "Please, girls, quiet, quiet." And the headmistress comes back. She walks right back to me. She says, "Where's the bell?" I said, "Why me?" She said, "Only you would have done it."
Well, tell her a story about the chalk. You had this new teacher come and had you write the name on the blackboard.
A brand new teacher came to school, and she comes into class, and she says, "Girls, I just want you to know I've just moved back to Pittsburgh, and I don't know anything, so if you don't mind, let me just start by asking you to write your names on the board." So every kid gets up, I get up, and I start to write my name, and the chalk breaks. And she says, "You're Audrey, sit down." I said, "You said you just got back to town." She said, "Yeah, but they warned me about you." And that's my life.
So, Doc, what were you thinking? Mom is a little nervous, a little concerned about her rebellious streak, maybe not ready to be married. Any concerns for you?
Not at all. I love that. And my mother and dad, of course, they were friendly with her parents, which was, a plus. And I just liked her rebellious spirit and her jokes and just the way she was.
Has she carried that on in varying respects all the way through to this day?
Oh, yeah. She never changed. We've been married many, many years.
But I behave a little bit better now.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. So your career, Audrey, what did you do?
I really didn't do anything. I didn't have a career. I was a mother, and a happy mother for 2 great boys, and a wife.
But then you went into PR and did some great things.
Then I opened my own public relations firm. That's true.
Once our kids grew up, Audrey went to work.
Okay. So you wanted to stay home with the boys.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you don't go to college and graduate in just a couple of years to decide, okay, I want to be
a mother,
a housewife and a mother for the rest of my life.
Right.
But you made the commitment for the kids' sake as they were growing up to give them all that they needed in a mom, which must have made your mom thrilled that you were willing to make those kind of self-sacrifices for your children. I mean, talk about being able to clearly demonstrate to your parents that you have your priorities in order.
I would say my mother would think, what is she doing to the boys?
You think she would have
thinking it was a good idea.
Yeah,
but at any rate, when they were grown, I did start my own public relations firm.
How did you decide on public relations?
I guess because I just became interested in things. Like we had an artist that come in from France to paint the kids' pictures at one point, and we were talking about museums, and I said, how great a museum would be if kids could touch things. because you could never touch things at Carnegie Museum. And we lived next door to Elsie and Henry Hillman at that point, and I mentioned to Elsie that there should be a children's museum. She said, okay, go start it. So that I started the Pittsburgh Children's Museum.
They funded it, Henry.
And they funded it. And
Wow. So the Children's Museum that countless thousands upon tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people have taken their children to, is here today because you thought it was important for children
to be able
to have a
touch.
hands-on experience.
No question about it.
Absolutely.
And they make she made a big deal out of it, and they still do, I think, that the children should touch the things there. Just the opposite of an adult's museum.
That's pretty impressive.
Oh, thanks.
I mean, it's amazingly impressive that you come up with this idea and then are able to then launch this.
I was able, that was the bug. And then, of course,
She did so many other great things. Go ahead.
Well, then when I opened the firm, I became friendly with one of the directors at the Three Rivers Arts Festival. So I was a PR person for the Three Rivers Arts Festival for a couple of years. And then
more than a couple of years, and she really was there at the very beginning of the Three Rivers Arts Festival and really got it off the ground.
And then the greatest thing is a couple friends came to me and said they wanted to have a race for the cure for breast cancer for women, to raise money for women. And I said, that's great. She said, yeah, it's great, except the only time they have open is Mother's Day. I said, that's the perfect time to do it. For mothers on Mother's Day, a race to prevent cancer and Race for the Cure. And that's how Race for the Cure started.
And you saw that as a wonderful opportunity when everybody else thought it was the worst thing.
I remember she came, I came home for dinner. We sat down and she said, I had this meeting today. We had to get permission from CMU for the date for the Race for the Cure because it was in Shenley Park there by their campus. Mm-hmm. They had to get their permission, the city's permission for a date. And they told her, and then the Race for the Cure committee, that the only date that, I think there were 2 or 3 dates that were possible, one of which was Mother's Day. And the women on the committee said, ooh, Mother's Day, you don't want to do it on a holiday. And Audrey said, Mother's Day, that's great. That's a perfect day for it. And by the way, in other towns, cities around the country, many of them have it on Mother's Day. It started here in Pittsburgh. Wow. There are some places where it's not on Mother's Day, but there are other cities who realize that that's the perfect day to celebrate Race for the Cure on Mother's Day, right?
It is a perfect day for it.
Yeah. So, and that was really Audrey. So, what do you mean you don't like Mother's Day? That's the day it should be. So that started that. She really was in on the beginning of that in Pittsburgh.
How long did you have your firm?
Ooh.
Well, it goes back to the 1980s, 1970s.
Okay.
20 or 30 years. And then when the kids when the kids grew up and moved away and we moved downtown, I retired.
You're retired.
I retired. But I'm not tired.
No,
I just retired.
Well, the way I understand it, Doc keeps you working hard every day. I mean, is it true, Doc, you have your office, and Audrey, you have your office, and you guys are working every day?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
I do a lot of radio interviews around the country,
mm-hmm.
and just promoting my book, the all-time book, Fascinating Facts.
And by the way, he was called Dr. Knowledge by a radio announcer who was interviewing at that time, and he said, Dr. Knowledge. And we thought that was such a great name, we'll pick that up.
Yeah, actually, there's a talk show host in Kansas City and one in Houston. Both came up with that name, which I'm very grateful for. And so,
well, let's go back a little bit. Before that, we got your initial interest in the Fascinating Facts going back to when you were a teenager on that July 4th, working at the radio station. and then you started to have this curiosity. How did it first begin to manifest itself? How did you first see this as a way that you could make money with it, as an example?
Well, my dad wanted me to go to business school for college, but I got this desire I love journalism. I love to listen to news and read news, and then this July 4th story just emphasized that, just amplified that for me. And so we had dinner one night with a guy who had just come back from Syracuse. He was doing business there and talked about what a wonderful journalism school they had there. So we started to investigate that, and contrary to my dad's wishes, I said I really would like to go to a journalism school instead of a business school. He finally agreed, thank goodness.
So Bob Prince having more influence on you than Dad.
My father, yeah, as it turned out. Anyhow, I just, loved the journalism era. We had one of the first college radio stations in the country. We'll question whether it was Wisconsin that had the first one or Syracuse that had the first one. We think it was Syracuse. And I was a senior the year that they started the radio station there. And I was the news and sports director of the college radio station. And then I got a job here when I came back on a radio station here in Pittsburgh. And I started to write. For many years, my main business was I had a feature called I Bet You Didn't Know. It was a syndicated sports column. And then I had one called Interesting Facts, which was a syndicated news column. And we sold that as a sponsored feature in newspapers in the U.S. and Canada. And I did that for, 50-some years. And again, just, looking for fascinating stories, both in sports and non-sports.
Audrey, did you work with him in promoting him during this entire time?
Oh, absolutely. She was a big help. I used to run everything by her. I'd write this week's column, show it to her, and she would edit it and, make any suggestions to improve the writing.
Interesting enough, Martina does the same thing with me. Whatever I write, Martina wants to see it first, and she should, because she's great as an editor, and she usually makes fun of me by joking that it's amazing how intelligent you sound when you talk, but then when you write, how is this even possible? But no, I get what you're saying.
Those are two different things.
Completely two different things.
Yeah.
No denying them.
So she really helped me. And then over the years, people said, we had all these interesting facts in these two columns, I Bet You Didn't Know, and Interesting Facts. We were in several hundred papers around the country. And over the years, people kept saying, why don't you put that stuff in books? So when we got to the 1990s, I wrote my first book called Knowledge in a Nutshell. And I think Audrey came up with that name. I'm a little vague on where we got the title Knowledge in a Nutshell, but I think that was Audrey that came up with that name for our first book, Knowledge in a Nutshell. And that was just a collection of, what I considered the best stuff I had written over the years. Then I did one I got a publisher who liked the idea and wanted more than the one book. So then I did one on sports. Mm-hmm. And then came 9/11 in 2001, and I'm sitting there on the day of 9/11, watching the terrible things going on, and I thought we should have a book on America, talking about the great things in America's past. So then the next book I did was Knowledge in a Nutshell in America, and then I had done some work for the Heinz Company, so they wanted a book on popular products, the Heinz edition, so I did that. Anyhow, I wrote about 12 of these Knowledge in a Nutshell books in the early 2000s. And that led to the final version here, Mangino. In 2016, I decided to take the best of all I had from all the books I've done. We also had one on presidents, by the way, and put it in one volume, a bigger volume. And I came up with the idea of the all-time book of fascinating facts, which has over 300 pages, over 600 stories. And that was published in 2016. We've since updated it a couple times, including last year, to add some new facts, some new stories, and bring everything up to date. So that, in a nutshell, is the story of knowledge in a nutshell, and the all-time book of fascinating facts.
One of the things that's really fascinated me over the years is knowing that when you're telling the stories about different portions of the book and different facts, whether it's the 4th of July or it's food or it's 9/11 or whatever it might be, that you do all of this from memory, that it isn't as though you have all of this in front of you and you're reading it. How is it that you keep your mind so sharp to be able to have all of this available to you at a moment's notice, whatever it is that I happen to want to talk about that day?
I'm glad you asked that, because for everybody's benefit, a doctor years ago told me, we all hear about physical exercise. We should all exercise, how good physical exercise is for you. Mm-hmm. You don't hear people say, how about doing mental exercise? And that stuck with me, and this is years ago, and I've spent my adult life really, doing mental. I get in bed at night, and one mental exercise I do is name all the presidents. We've had 40, Biden is the 46th president. We've had 45 men have been president. One man had 2 years because he served non-consecutive terms. Grover Cleveland was both the 22nd and 24th president. But anyhow, I get in bed and go through all 46 or 45 presidents. 1 is George Washington, 2 is John Adams, 3 is Thomas Jefferson, and so on. And that's a great exercise people can do. You can start, just do the first 5, get those solid in your mind, then do the next 5, and so on.
But you're right. He does have an unbelievable memory and a mental attitude. We do trivia. There's the trivia thing on the computer every day, trivia fun fact. I mean, he knows. He comes up with the answer, and I'm like in awe. And he says, well, I remember that.
I'm very blessed on that. I don't know why that is. I mean, I think doing the mental exercise has certainly sharpened my memory. And I thank dear God for that, because my vision, the one problem I have with my vision is not good. I have macular degeneration, so I can't read as much as I used to. And so I need the memory. Like when I would be on the radio with you and we would talk about all these stories, I really had to do it from memory, because I really can't read notes even. So I'm just so fortunate that dear God has given me, the good memory. But I think for everybody, if you can do those mental exercises, that they are as important, maybe more so,
yes,
than the physical exercises.
One of the things that people are not going to pick up on, because this is audio, and maybe, Doc, you can't pick up on because of your macular degeneration. But Audrey, as he's talking, you are looking at him with such fondness and such tenderness. And even to this day, it looks as though a sense of admiration in what he's done over his career and what he still does and pushes himself to do to this day.
I didn't know that I showed it on my face, but you're absolutely right. I am in awe. I am in awe. He is amazing.
Dr. Knowledge, Misinformation, and I am so happy to be having both of you join me on the Mangino Talks podcast. What we're going to do over the course of as long as we can, let's put it that way, as long as we possibly can, is have Dr. Knowledge and Misinformation come together and kind of a recreation, if you will, maybe a little bit of what it was like when you guys were doing radio together those years ago, because that stopped around what time? What year was that? Like when you stopped doing the nighttime show?
2013.
2013.
10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
I did it for about 13 years. I started in 2000.
Yeah. I was going through pictures of when I first came to KDKA and some of the early pictures that I have with you guys, and I'll have to share some of those with you too. But I'm looking forward to the shows as we move forward. We're going to go through the all-time book of fascinating facts and give you more information that's just absolutely intriguing and curious. Also, we're going to give you opportunities to be able to be a part of it too. If you want to be able to hear Dr. talk about some of the fascinating facts that he has, you're always welcome to drop us a line once again through all the social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, even on the YouTube channel as well. And you can send me an email, mangino@manginotalks.com. And before we wrap things up, the website for people to go to get more information about you guys and, of course, to be able to get a copy of the book for themselves.
The website is knowledgeinanutshell.com. The name of the book is The All-Time Book of Fascinating Facts. But you can see it, read about it on knowledgeinanutshell.com.
All right. And the phone number
is 1-800-NUTSHELL.
And what's really great about this is that when you call the number, you're not going to get an automated voice messaging system. You know, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. When they call, who answers the phone?
One of us will answer it.
And if you place your order with you, my understanding is they may be more likely to get an autographed copy too.
If somebody would like that, we'd be happy to do that. Sure.
All right. Dr. Knowledge, Misinformation, thank you very much for coming on Mangino Talks.
Thank you for having us.
Always good being with you, Mangino.
Thank you for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast. New episodes drop Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. For more on me and the show, be sure to visit manginotalks.com. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by using @ManginoTalks, or you can just Google Mangino Talks. Once you find me, please like, follow, subscribe, and share the pages with your friends and family. And thanks again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.